Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutrabhashya Krutau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah. Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. So we are doing Drg Drashya Viveka and we are on verse number 15. Let us quickly see what verse number 13 and 14 had to say. Until verse 12, the text dealt with Tvampada. Tvampada means about the individual. And this individual is told by Upanishad that you are that. Tat Tvam Asi. Tvam means you. And Tat means that which you are trying to become. So Upanishad tells this individual Jiva that you are already that. That means your goal or Ishvara which you are trying to become. So Tvampada means Jiva, it is about Jiva, and Tatpada means about Ishvara. So text has already dealt with Tvampada. It will also be dealing with it again, but until verse number 12 it talked about Tvampada and then it begins Tatpada. Tatpada, more verses are not given for Tatpada, but whatever little is given that we have seen. So in verse number 13 the text said Shakti Dvayam hi Maya Yaha Vikshepa Avruti Rupakam. So it said that Maya has twofold powers. Which are these twofold powers? Then Vikshepa Avruti Rupakam. It says Vikshepa and Avruti are the twofold powers of Maya. Then what do they do? What is the function of both of them? Which both? Vikshepa and Avruti. See, these are the two powers, Vikshepa and Avruti. These are the two powers of Maya. Now, what is Vikshepa and what is Avruti? So, Vikshepa means creating and Avruti means veiling. Avruti means that which covers, that which veils, and Vikshepa means that which projects or which creates. So, having concealed or veiled the thing, then the Vikshepa power of Maya makes us take the thing to be different from what it is. So, not knowing the thing for what it is the work of Avruti, that is, it veils, and so we cannot see the thing as it is. But this is the work of Avruti, that is, veiling power of Maya. But then what is the power of Vikshepa? It makes us take the thing differently, different from what it is. In our example of rope and snake, not seeing the rope as rope in semi-darkness, that is the result of veiling. And then taking it to be different from what it is, that is taking the rope to be snake, is the work of Vikshepa. It is due to this projecting power of Maya that we take rope to be snake. First of all, Avruti, that is the concealing power of Maya, conceals the real Swarupa of rope, and the Vikshepa part of Maya enables us to take it different from what it is. Similarly here in verse number 13, the author said that these are the twofold powers of Maya, Avruti and Vikshepa. So now verse number 13 and 14 talks about the Vikshepa power of Maya. So in the second line it is said, what does this Vikshepa power do? Then it is said, Vikshepa Shakti Lingadi Brahmandantam Jagat Srujet. In the second line of verse 13, it is said, Vikshepa Shakti, this creating power of Maya, this projecting power of Maya. What does it create and what does it project? Then it is said, Lingadi Brahmandantam Jagat Srujet. It creates the world beginning from Lingadi, Linga, to Brahmanda. Linga means subtle body. So it creates subtle body at the individual level and at the samashti level or at the level of totality. What does it create? The entire creation. So subtle body at the vyashti level or individual level, and at the level of creation, at the level of totality, which is known as samashti, it creates the entire Brahmanda. The entire cosmos is created or projected. Projected is a better word. So it projects first subtle body here and Brahmanda, cosmos at the level of totality. This is what is done by the Vikshepa power of Maya. Then verse number 14 elaborated upon this. It said, Shrushtir Nama Brahma Rupe Sachidananda Vastuni Abdo Fenadivat Sarva Nama Rupa Prasarana. What is Srushti? What is creation? It is said here in nutshell. Shrushtihi Nama Rupe Brahma Sachidananda Vastuni. What we call creation is nothing but manifestation of names and forms, Nama and Rupa. Manifestation of names and forms upon what? Sachidananda Vastuni. Upon the Vastu. Vastuni is seventh case, Saptami. So what does it mean? Upon the Vastu. Vastu means Adhisthana or substratum or reality. Call it Brahman, call it Vastu, call it Adhisthana. Upon that, Srushti is nothing but manifestation or projection of names and forms. So in reality, what is Vastu? What is Sachidananda? Upon that, names and forms are projected. So projection of names and forms upon Brahman is Srushti. Do you have any example? Yes, the example is given in the second line. Abdo Fenadivat, just as upon water or upon ocean, Fenadivat, like form, etc. Form, ripple, waves, etc., which are nothing but Nama Rupa Prasarana. Sarva Nama Rupa Prasarana. It is expansion of names and forms upon Abdo. Abdo is also seventh case. Upon water or upon ocean, what do we find? Forms and waves and ripples and vortex, etc. So many things are seen in the ocean. What are they? If you look into the wave, if you look into the ripple, what is it? Nothing but water. But wave is name and form plus water. Form is also water plus name and form. Or let us put it this way, that form is nothing but name and form projected upon water, or water appearing as form, ripple, etc. is ocean. Ocean appearing in different forms is creation. Similarly, Brahman appearing as this names and forms is creation. So this is what, who has done that? Which power of Maya? Vikshepa power of Maya. The projecting power of Maya has done this. Actually, in reality, what is there? Satchidananda Vastu. In reality, there is nothing but Brahman, but Vikshepa Shakti creates what? Different names and forms. It projects different names and forms upon Brahman. Brahman appearing as this creation full of 5 elements, full of human beings, birds, animals, and so many different species and gods and so many things. All of this is creation. And what is that? Nothing but Brahman. Okay. So in these 2 verses, verse number 13 and 14, they talked about the Vikshepa power of Maya. Vikshepa means the projecting power of Maya. Now, verse number 15 talks about the concealing power of Maya. First, it said that Maya has these twofold powers. Which are they? Concealing and projecting. Avruti and Vikshepa. And then it talked about the Vikshepa power. And now in verse number 15, the author talks about the veiling power of Maya. This we have already seen. I am just revising it. So verse number 15, I am reading it. Drg Drashya bhedam bahishcha brahma sargayoh avrunotya parashaktihi sa samsarasya karanam. So see, what is now this? What is done by the veiling power or the avrutti part of Maya? So it says, Antah Drg Drashya yoho bhedam and bahishcha brahma sargayoho bhedam. So avrunoti aparashaktihi. Aparashakti means the other power of Maya. The other power means here avarana power or the veiling power of Maya. Aparashaktihi. What does it do? It does what? Avrunoti. It conceals. It veils. What does it veil? It veils both inside and outside. Now what is this inside and outside? Inside means keeping this body as the standard, or keeping this body in mind, or let us say with reference from the standpoint of this body, whatever is inside is called antah, and whatever is outside is called bahihi. So from the standpoint of the body. Otherwise, actually speaking, in creation we cannot say inside and outside. Just as in ocean, we cannot say inside the ocean and outside the ocean. No. But here with reference to the body, with reference to this body, whatever is inside is called antah, and whatever is outside, that is the rest of the creation, is called bahihi. Now this veiling power veils something inside and veils something outside too. What does it veil? So it says antah Drg Drashya yoho bhedam avrunoti. Inside it veils the distinction that obtains between drashta and drashya. And outside it veils the distinction which obtains between Brahman and creation. And then sa samsarasya karanam. In this way, this power called avarana or avruti becomes the cause of samsara. So now let us see. We have already seen, but we'll quickly look into it again. So it veils the distinction, the difference that obtains between the drashta and drashya, the seer and the seen. So now see, in this one body itself, as we have seen, there are two. Which are these two? Drashta, drashya. Drashta means seer and drashya means that which is seen. Okay, now here, whatever is object of my knowledge is always drashya, and whatever and that which illumines is called drashta. So this body is object of my knowledge. My sense organs are objects of my knowledge. My mind is object of my knowledge. I am aware of what is going on in my mind, what thoughts are coming there, what cognitions are taking place. Even my intellect, the judgments that take place in the intellect is also an object of my knowledge. Just as this pencil is object of my knowledge. So the pencil is drashya, seen, and I am the seer. Similarly, here there is one illuminator who illumines the body, etc. Who illumines the sakshi, the drashta. The drashta illumines and the body is illumined, mind is illumined, intellect is illumined, objects of sense organs of knowledge and sense organs of action, all of them are illumined. In short, they are objects of your knowledge, and that is why they fall in the category of drashya, in the category of seen. And who is the seer? Drashta is the seer, the witness who illumines. Okay, but even though there are two here, the seer and the seen, the seer is not seen. The seer is not seen means it is not visible. Had it been visible, just as these fingers are visible, I know that this is index finger, this is ring finger, this is thumb, all this I know. Why? Because it is object of my knowledge. If the sakshi or the drashta were an object of knowledge, like these fingers, these hands, this palm, etc., had the seer also been object of knowledge like this, then it would also become drashya. And there would be some other seer illuminating that. But that is not the case. Here the drashta is not seen, because it doesn't become object of knowledge, it always remains the seer. The seer remains the seer. And all these objects of knowledge, knowledge becomes seen. My eyes, see, my eyes are seeing this hand, but eyes again are seen by the mind. Mind sees the eyes, but mind is again seen by intellect. Intellect sees the mind, but again the same intellect is seen by the seer. And that seer is not seen by anyone. Therefore, it ever remains the seer. So, in short, what I am trying to say is that here there is seer plus seen. The seer is not seen. He always remains the seer. And all this is seen. But we do not know this. We take this setup or this complex to be one, forgetting or overlooking that there are two here. Where there are two, the concealing power of Maya makes me take it as one. Follow? That is why it is said, Antaha Drg Drashyayoho Bhedam Avrunoti. That is why Granthakara says that this veiling power of Maya has done its work by veiling the distinction that obtains between the seer and the seen inside. Now what does it do outside? Outside also Bahishcha and also outside Bahihicha. It conceals something inside and it conceals something outside too. Also, cha means also. What does it conceal outside? Brahma Sargayoho Bhedam. The distinction between Brahma and Sarga. Sarga means creation. Now, when we look at the creation, there is the substratum also. There is that Adhisthana also. There is that Satchidananda also. So, just as when I am looking at the snake, in reality what is there? In reality it is rope, but I see only snake. So, the veiling power of Maya conceals the rope from me and makes me see the snake only. Follow? Similarly here, where I say where I think there is only creation, what I take as creation in fact has two things. What? There is that Brahman also and creation also. But the veiling power effectively conceals Brahman and makes me take the creation as real, makes me look only at the creation. So what is hidden? What is concealed by this other power of Maya? It effectively conceals the reality. It effectively conceals Brahman. When I am engrossed in the names and forms, creation is nothing but names and forms. When I am dealing with them, when I am interacting with them, looking at nature, trees, ocean, sky, etc. When I am seeing that, in reality, what is there? There is nothing but Brahman. There are two there. One is reality and other one is appearance. Just as, go back to the example of rope and snake. In reality, what is there is rope, but I see snake. So the snake conceals the rope. Similarly, when we look at creation, the creation is concealing the reality. And I take the creation as real. I am engrossed in that. I am preoccupied only with names and forms, overlooking the reality. Who did this? The veiling power of Maya. So, it effectively concealed the distinction between the reality, that is Brahman, and Sarga. And that became the cause of samsara, that became the cause of suffering, that became the cause of misleading me. Here also, I could not perceive the reality. And outside also, I could not perceive the reality. Perceiving means not seeing, but understanding. I overlook the reality in and out, everywhere. So, through and through, Maya conceals everything. It works. Here also I make a mistake, and there also I make a mistake. Let me tell you, had I known that I am Brahman, then I would have known that this Brahman is not circumscribed or limited to this body only. It is everywhere. Which means what I call creation also is nothing but Brahman. I would have known that. But since the concealing power of Maya has concealed the reality here, the same thing is extended outside. Understood? So this is what is done by the Avruti part of Maya. In short, in these two verses, author showed us the function of both the veiling power of Maya as well as the projecting, Avruti as well as Vikshepa. Now, having done this, evam Shakti Dvayatmakam Maya Swarupam Pradarshya, having shown the twofold power of Maya, now, Idanim, now what does it do? Now goes back to the discussion of subtle body. The author now goes back again to the discussion of the subtle body, which was touched in verse number 12. In verse number 12, we have already seen this. There, author introduced the subtle body, and it said that Manohankruti Upadanam, the subtle body is the cause of both the ego as well as mind, and it is Jadam. This is what was, this was already dealt with in verse number 12. There, Samanyataha, this discussion or the Swarupa of subtle body was dealt with generally. Now, Linga Swarupam Visheshataha Pradarshayati, now it shows the particular aspect of this subtle body, which in other words is also called as Linga Deha, which we have already seen. So now let us come back, let us now begin with verse number 16, which, as I said, is going to take up the discussion upon subtle body. Sakshinah purato bhatam lingam dehena sanyutam chitichaya samaveshat jivasyad vyavaharikah. So it says, see, Sakshinah purato bhatam lingam dehena sanyutam chitichaya samaveshat jivah syad vyavaharikah. See, it says Sakshinah purato bhatam lingam dehena sanyutam. This lingam means subtle body. This subtle body, along with, I am first translating the verse, lingam dehena sanyutam, this subtle body along with what? Gross body. What does it do? It is Sakshinah purato bhatam. It obtains before the Sakshi. Sakshi means witness. It is there in close proximity. In Puratah Bhatam means, when Purata means in front of. So this subtle body along with the gross body shines in front of the Sakshinah. Sakshi means consciousness. So this subtle body along with the gross body shines in front of the Sakshi or consciousness or witness. And then what happens? It is said in the second line. Chiti chaya samaveshat, means then because of the infusion of the reflection because of the infusion of the reflection or because of the infusion of the light from the consciousness, what happens? This subtle body gets enlivened. And this subtle body along with the gross body which got enlivened because of the consciousness, that it is now called Jivaha. Jivaha syat vyavaharikaha. So this subtle body along with the gross body which shines in front of the Sakshi, and then because of the infused light of the consciousness upon this subtle body, what happened? The subtle body also got enlivened, and that is called Jivaha. Jivaha syat. This subtle body now got enlivened. It is live now. And it is called Jivaha. Jivaha means individual. And it is this Jiva who is Vyavharikaha. He is called Vyavharikaha. Vyavharikaha means one who does all transaction. The one who carries out all the transaction is this Jiva and not consciousness. Consciousness cannot do anything. Consciousness cannot talk, see or anything. But because of the light of the consciousness, that the subtle body which got enlivened became sentient, and that is why now it is capable of transacting. That is why it is called Vyavharikaha. That is why it is called the one which carries out all the transaction. And who is that entity? Jivaha. Okay, so this was the translation of the verse. Now let me explain. See, it says Sakshinaha Purato Bhatam. Now, we have already seen that this lingam, that is this subtle body which we already know is made up of 17 components. Which are they? They are mind, intellect, plus 5 organs of perception, 5 organs of action, and 5 pranas, 15, and mind and intellect, 17. This 17 in the subtle form is called subtle body. Okay. But since it is subtle, it is sukshma, it requires gross body for it to obtain. Subtle body can never be without the gross body. It has to have the residence in the form of gross body. Subtle body requires the residence of the gross body. So, that is why it is said that the subtle body along with the gross body, okay, and then it is there. It is already there. Then, we have already seen that the subtle body is made of the subtle matter of the 5 elements. And that because of that, the subtle body has the capacity, it has eligibility of receiving the light of the consciousness. It has the capacity to reflect consciousness. And where is this consciousness? Consciousness is everywhere. And subtle body is Purata Sakshinaha Purataha Bhatam. It obtains in front of the consciousness, which means it is in close proximity of the consciousness. And that is why, and it being subtle, being it has the capacity to reflect, so it reflects the light of the consciousness. And moment it reflects the light of the consciousness, it becomes enlivened, it becomes sentient, and that sentiency is passed over to the gross body. So first one to receive the light of consciousness, the infusion of consciousness, is the subtle body. And that too, in the subtle body, it is ahankara which receives first. And then the rest of the subtle body becomes enlivened. And then it transmits that consciousness to the gross body. Understood? So first subtle body becomes conscious, becomes sentient, and then it transmits that sentiency to the gross body. And that is why both of them, even though in reality being inert, even though in reality they are inert, they appear conscious, they appear sentient, okay? But they have received this because from the consciousness, which is self-evident, which is self-effulgent. Consciousness has not received that consciousness from some other consciousness, no. It is self-effulgent by nature, and it is there, it is everywhere. But everything doesn't have the capacity to receive that consciousness. Only subtle body has. Understood? So the text says, Sakshinaha purato bhatam lingam dehena sanyutam. So subtle body is there along with the gross body, and it shines before, it is there before consciousness. So the sentiency, the consciousness gets infused into this subtle body. I will give you the example of, we will go back to the example of fan. See, in the fan, just to make it simple so that you can understand, that when you see the fan, there are three blades. Three blades of the fan are there. And there is a motor in the center. And there is electricity also. So the electricity or the power energizes first the motor, and then that energized motor, because of that energized motor, even the blades also begin to move. Now let us see the similarity between the example and that which is exemplified, Drishtanta and Darshtanta. The blades of the fan are comparable to the gross body, and the motor in the center of the fan is comparable to subtle body, and the power or the electricity is comparable to consciousness. Okay, so now say this first, because of the power, what happens? The motor becomes energized. Similarly, because of consciousness, who becomes sentient first? Energy, that electricity is in the place of consciousness. So because of the energy, the motor got energized first, and then it passed on that to the blades. Similarly, here consciousness gets infused first into the subtle body, and then it passes on to the gross body. And this is how that which was inert, what? The subtle body and the gross body, becomes sentient, and it is called jiva. It is called jiva. Jiva is actually, going back to the example of sun. Sun, looking into the reflection of the water in a bucket, there is a bucket full of water. Bucket is in the place of the gross body. Water inside the bucket is in the place of the subtle body. So this water is there, and the bucket containing that water is there, and sun is shining in the sky. What happens? Water being what it is, water is comparable to the subtle body. Water being what it is, it reflects sun. But now what happens? So there is reflection here in the water. But sun thinks that I am this reflection. I am only this, and not my reality is not this in the sky, but I am this. Sun looking upon himself as only this reflection is called Jivaha. Similarly here, consciousness reflecting in the subtle body is called Jivaha. Consciousness definitely energizes this subtle body, but then it forgets that I am consciousness and takes himself to be only this subtle body. And subtle body has its limitations, plus the gross body which carries the subtle body also has limitations, and that is how consciousness thinks I am small, and that is Jiva. But it is this Jiva which is what? Vyavaharikaha. It is the one, it is this one which does all the Vyavahara, which does all the, which really transacts. Which means what? See, Brahman on its own, consciousness on its own cannot do any Vyavahara. Just as power on its own, without getting, without passing through the motor and through the blades, electricity could not have done anything. But because it got, because it passed through the motor, then through the blades, that it could move. That the fan is moving is thanks to power. But that the power can now move is also thanks to what? Thanks to the motor plus the blades. Motor had that capacity to receive the energy. Energy very potent, but it could not have done anything on its own. It requires an appliance. It requires a gadget. On its own it cannot do anything. Similarly, consciousness on its own cannot do any Vyavahara. For it to do Vyavahara, it has to become Jiva. Becoming means what? It has to get reflected in subtle body. And subtle body also cannot do unless it has gross body. So, this is how it became Vyavaharika. Brahman is not doing anything, but having got reflected into the subtle body, which has prana, which has mind, which has intellect, which has organs of perception, which has organs of action, and all of them are in the gross body. And so now it sees, hears, smells, talks, thinks, everything. So now this Jiva is knower, doer, hearer, walker, talker, it's so many things. Brahman on its own, consciousness is not walker or doer or thinker or knower for that matter. No. It is beyond all of that. But when it gets reflected in the subtle body and in the gross body respectively, then it gets the name of Jiva. And this Jiva is the one who walks, does karma and so many things. So, this is what is, as it were coming down of some Brahman. On its own it could not have done. To become transactional, it has to get reflected in the subtle body. See, understand this. Vyavaharikaha means transactional. Whereas consciousness is, in reality there are three kinds of realities. One is absolute reality or Paramarthik reality. Paramarthik means it ever remains the same. It doesn't change. There is absolutely no change in its nature. Consciousness is like that. It is called absolute reality. It cannot walk. It has no form. It cannot talk, think, nothing. It is nirguna, nirakara. No vyavhara, no samsara, nothing. Just consciousness. But when, because of Maya, subtle body is created, we have already seen that the two powers of Maya, what did they do? They, in reality, created such a situation that Brahman got veiled, and because of the concealing power, and then because of the projecting power, it became subtle body as well as creation, and now the background is ready. The ground is ready for nirguna to become saguna, to appear as saguna. So Brahman or consciousness, which is in reality paramarthik reality, absolute reality, that cannot do anything. But when it gets reflected in the consciousness, it becomes transactional reality. Not really, but appearance. So nirguna or paramarthik reality appears as vyavharik reality. Understood? That is, how did that happen? Because of the two Shaktis of Maya. This is how anirvachaniya Maya karyatvena. This is inexplicable. This Maya, the way it does things, it is inexplicable. But had it not been for that, Brahman or consciousness would not have become transactional. But this also is just an appearance, okay? This is what has happened. But then, now one question arises. See, what is the question? Nanu vyavaharika jivasya sakala samsara nirvahakatvepi mithyabhutatvat. You say that this jiva is an appearance, just as the snake is an appearance, and whatever is appearance is called mithya. That which does not have any substantiality but still appears is called mithya. Let me give you the example of mirage water. When you see mirage water, which means in reality there is only sand, but because of the reflection of the sun, rays of the sun, the sand appears as water, and that gives the impression of water, wherein actually there is not even a drop of water, still appears as water. And so we give it the name mirage water. Mirage water means no water, but appearance of water. You cannot go and drink that water. You cannot carry your glass, even when you are thirsty, carry your glass and fetch water from that. There is no water, and neither is it going to quench your thirst. Still appears. So what is not there and yet appears is called mithya, appearance. So this is mithya. So now the question that arises is that which you call this jiva is also as it is an appearance, because Brahman has not undergone any change. Consciousness has not undergone any change whatsoever to become individual or to become creation. This handiwork is nothing but, this handiwork is of Maya. Maya's two powers created this appearance. That is why jiva is mithya. Mithya means apparent, not substantial, appears but is not there. Okay. So, vyavaharika jivasya Sakala samsara nirvahakatvepi mithya. You say that this jiva is vyavharika, transacts with the world, but if it is an appearance, it is mithya. So in reality, it is not there. So an entity called jiva in reality is not there. This is what it amounts to. Then, second part, Nitya Muktasya Sakshinah Samsara Abhavacha. And second thing is, when jiva is mithya, when it is apparent, what about consciousness? Consciousness has not become jiva, so it is ever free. It is never bound because there has been no change whatsoever in its svarupa. There has been no change, no intrinsic change. Consciousness has not undergone any change whatsoever to become jiva or the creation. Therefore, Brahman is what it is, consciousness is what it is changeless, and the jiva is apparent. Then who is bound? The question is, who is bound in that case? Consciousness is not bound. It is ever free, ever changeless, ever as it is. And as you said, this jiva is also mithya, is also apparent, comparable to snake upon the rope. Rope, even though appears as snake, remains rope. There is no change in the rope. So nothing has happened to the rope, and still snake appears, which in reality is not there. Similarly, here, consciousness is what it is. It is ever free, changeless, complete, absolute. And jiva is an appearance. Then who is bound? And what are the scriptures meant for? Who are they meant for? That is the question. Moksha, ubayoho api moksha anadhikarat. Moksha or liberation, which means you are free now. Liberation means being free. Who wants to be free? Consciousness is not bound in the first place. So freedom is not required for that. There is no moksha for consciousness. And at the same time, since jiva is not there, it is just an appearance. There cannot be moksha for appearance. Then, who needs to be free? For whom is this moksha? The phenomenon called moksha is for whom in that case? That is the question. Adhikarinaha abhavaja. Since there is no one called jiva, because in reality is not there, then another question, another point, valid point which is raised, question which is raised is Shastra Vaiyartyam Syad. The scriptures, Upanishad, all of them will be useless. They will be rendered useless. Vaiyartyam. Why? Because who will listen to them? Who will be reading them? Because consciousness doesn't require scriptures. It is not bound in that from the first place. And the jiva is not there really. So, what are these Upanishads meant for? Who is the adhikari for the scriptures? This kind of thing will happen. When you say that jiva is mithya, you realize, what are you saying? Why are we studying? What are we studying for? We are doing our sadhana and we want to become free and study and all of, but for whom? Consciousness doesn't require. It is ever free and there is no jiva. This is the question, valid point. So, to reply to that is verse number 17. So, let us read that. Let us read verse number 17. Asya jivattvamaropat sakshinyapyavabhasate avrutau tu vinashtayam bede patye payati tat. See, yes, you are right that consciousness doesn't require, because it is free and there is no jiva, and yet there is the need for scriptures, because there is this thing called bondage. For whom is it? Let us see. See, asya jivatvam aropat sakshini api avabhasate. Asya means what? This vyavharika jivaha. This jiva, go back to the earlier verse. This one, verse number 16, in which we dealt with this vyavharikaha. Jiva is the one who transacts, and the samsara, transmigration, knowerness, doerness, kartrutva, bhoktrutva, sukhitva, dukhitva, etc. belongs to this jiva. And that asya jivatvam, this sukhitva, dukhitva, etc., which really apply to jiva, asya jivatvam sakshini api aropat bhasate. It is superimposed upon sakshini. It is superimposed upon consciousness or the witness. The limitations or the jivatva of this jiva is superimposed upon consciousness. Superimposed means it appears like that, superimposed. How long? It is not a permanent thing. One redeeming factor is this, that even though this ajnana is beginningless, but it has an end. It is not going to be there forever if you work for it. So, even though the jivatva limitations of this individual are, limitations belong to jiva, but they are superimposed upon consciousness due to ignorance, due to the veiling power of Maya. Avruto tu vinashtaya. But when that veiling power is destroyed, which means that when that veiling gets removed by knowledge, avruto tu vinashtayam, when that veiling is destroyed, just as you took this rope to be the snake, but when somebody throws the light with a torch, when somebody throws light, then what gets destroyed? That semi-darkness which was there gets destroyed, and now you see the rope clearly as rope. Where did the snake go? It was not there to begin with. It was just a superimposition. It was just a notion. It was just an appearance. Similarly, when consciousness, who thought himself to be the individual, comes to know the reality through scriptures, then the avruto means then the veiling power gets destroyed by knowledge. Bede bhate apayati tata. Then what happens? Then what happens? That the distinction between the seer and the seen, bede bhati, bede bhate vyavharika jha. Then what happens? The distinction between the seer and the seen becomes clear, crystal clear. That I am the seer and not the seen, which I took myself. So this is how, what happens? It is, so you said, your question was that consciousness is not bound, so no question of it becoming free, and the jiva is mithya, so that is also mithya, means which it is not there at all. Then who is bound, and for whom do we require the scriptures and teaching and all this? Why this class of Drg Drashya Vivek? Why should we take that? Yes, you are right, but the twofold power of Maya has already worked, and that is why consciousness takes himself to be jiva, because the subtle body is there along with the gross body, and the because of consciousness, see what happens, because of consciousness the subtle body became sentient even though it is inert. But then that which became sentient because of consciousness, the subtle body, thanks to the consciousness that it became enlivened, and then what does it do? It covers the very consciousness. This is what Maya does. From consciousness, and then it covers consciousness. But when that gets destroyed, consciousness comes to know its real nature. So that is what is said. Asya jivatvam aropat sakshini api avabhasate. Asya means vyavaharika jivasya jivatvam. This jiva, limitations which belong to this jiva are superimposed upon consciousness. Going back to the example of sun reflected in the bucket of water, sun is there and it is getting reflected in this bucket of water, and because the reflection is dull, sun thinks that I am dull. It thinks I am dull. So the dullness, where does it belong? Dullness belongs to the water contained in the bucket. But where is it superimposed? It is superimposed upon the sun. Sun thinks that I am dull. Imagine. It is sun which thinks I am dull. But then, what did this do? It effectively created a feeling in the sun that I am small. Similarly, the jivatva which belongs to the subtle body and the gross body is superimposed upon consciousness, and the consciousness of the self-effulgent consciousness is superimposed upon the subtle body. So what happens? This became sentient, but then this consciousness took himself to be a limited individual. But what happens? Avrutau tu vinashtayam. But then when they come across a teacher, when you come across the scriptures, they enlighten you that you are that. You are not really what you take yourself to be. You are Brahman. You are limitless. You are Satchidananda. Gnane natu tada jnanam yesham nashitam atmanah tesham adityavad jnanam prakashate. Prakashayati tatparam. Is Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that because of knowledge of the scriptures you come to know that you are Brahman, then the ignorance goes, and then you come to know your true nature. This verse we will spend some more time in the next class. Thank you. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.